Welcome to Mayor's Commission for Citizens with Disabilities May meeting. Welcome to our television audience, any guests, and our interpreter who's here. The audience will, the recording will rebroadcast for our meeting at 5 p.m. each Monday on Channel 22. You can also view the meeting recording at the Disabilities Commission website, which is www.cityofomaha.org. Then you'll click on the Mayor's Office, then click on Disabilities Commission. Just as a reminder of our purpose and mission, we exist to promote quality. Our mission is to promote quality of life, accessibility, and equity in all aspects related to the City of Omaha on behalf of and in cooperation with the citizens of Omaha who experience disabilities. In this role, we advise the mayor on issues of access, representation, employment, housing, and quality of life. We serve as a resource for Omaha citizens with disabilities and their families to express concerns and resolutions regarding issues affecting them. We publicize to citizens of Omaha the role of the Mayor's Commission for Citizens with Disabilities and resources available to assist citizens with disabilities and their families, employers, housing representatives, business owners, engineers, and architects, and others who have a role in bettering the life of Omaha citizens. And we serve as an advocate for accessibility issues at public buildings and infrastructure governed by city codes and ordinances, and for issues affecting employment of disabled persons in city government, and recommend to the mayor policies to improve accessibility and employment with the city for citizens with disabilities. We will have some announcements at the end of the meeting for upcoming events or things to know about. So have something to jot those down with. And then before we get into the heart of everything, we'll go through and do some introductions. I'm Megan Walls. I'm the chair for the Mayor's Commission for Citizens with Disabilities. I'm also with the Center for Disability Inclusion and work to across the lifespan and across environments to help businesses and community spaces be more inclusive for people with disabilities.
Hi, I'm Natalie Simmons.
Turn your mic on.
Sorry, I'm Natalie Simmons. I'm Secretary of the Mayor's Commission, and I'm a grant writer with Dotted Eye Writing Services.
Hi, I'm Ashley Wolf. I work for the Nebraska Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. I represent the deaf and hard of hearing community here in the state of Nebraska. I also am a representative for deaf-blind individuals here in the state of Nebraska.
Awesome. And online joining us, Nina, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nina Nazar. I am the president and founder of the Jansen's Foundation that looks to get a treatment for an ultra-rare disease called Jansen's metaphyseal chondrodysplasia. I'm also a diversity and equity and inclusion consultant. I work to improve spaces. I live with a disability. I have two boys who also have a disability, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you, Nina. We are missing several of our members today, so we did not have a quorum to approve any minutes or other items. And with that, we have Ralph Kellogg with us today to give us a presentation on the topic of when anxiety and panic come to work. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so we thought this was as good of a time as any to have this conversation. So Ralph, you want to come on up? You can take over.
Thank you. Very nice to be with all of you today. Are the slides? What do I need to do?
I'm going to share the screen first,
Okay.
and then we'll do your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you.
There you go.
I gave out that quick panicked look of someone who's needing to present but didn't have the slides, so I apologize for the delay. Thank you so much for coming today and listening to the presentation that's near and dear to my heart, which is invisible disabilities, and specifically, in my case, anxiety and panic. Takeaways from today, I want to set a foundation for understanding what it's like to have invisible disabilities, in particular within the workplace. I want to share what all of us can do, whether we're in the workplace or in a community event, to create a space for mental well-being conversations. And then lastly, provide tools for leaders to engage in collaborative and constructive conversations with employees or with individuals with whom they're working to talk about mental health. So, according to the American Mental Health Institute, 50 million plus Americans struggle with mental health issues. A lot of people think that that statistic would be higher, but this statistic was provided prior to the pandemic, and it only encapsulates those individuals who actually have a diagnosed illness of mental health. So if it seems low, it probably is. It doesn't take into consideration burnout. It doesn't take into consideration other factors that can contribute to mental health issues. So the numbers, some interesting numbers. 42.5 million people have expressed that they struggle with anxiety on some level or another, 21%. 8% of our population, or 21 million people, say that they've struggled with depression at some point. Interestingly enough, I also do counseling for suicide awareness, and the most common predictor of someone who potentially may try to take their lives by suicide is a significant depressive event. So depression in and of itself is something that all of us should be mindful of with our friends, family, and even coworkers. And then lastly, 8.29 million people struggle with panic disorders. Where I fall in this spectrum, if you will, is that I have diagnosed anxiety and I have diagnosed panic disorder. And someone once asked me, well, what's the difference between the two? How do, everyone gets anxious, everyone, feels panic at some point or another. For me, the anxiety can come on gradually over time. So if I have something to speak, if I have to speak at an event, or if I have to do something that might be particularly stressful at work, it's that anxiousness that you feel in your stomach, and that Sunday morning feeling before I've got to go into work, and it builds and it builds and it builds. The panic disorder comes on out of nowhere. It can be a trigger, it can be a smell, it can be walking into a room where I feel uncomfortable or othered, and it just comes on out of nowhere. The problem I have with the anxiety, and in particular with the panic, is when I have an attack, it's visible. My face flushes, my heart races, I look like I just ran a marathon because I get all sweaty. It's really gross, but that is a telltale sign that I'm struggling in that moment. But everyone has different signs, everyone has different cues that they provide when they're struggling with a mental health or mental well-being disorder. But those, in my case, are what can tip someone off that I'm struggling. So the numbers, some interesting factoids. If you look across the spectrum of individuals within our population, 7 million people, or 16% of African Americans, struggle with mental health in some form or fashion. Now, the difficulty is with capturing information like this is that you actually need to go to a doctor and have a medical diagnosis of struggling with an illness. Traditionally, within African American and Hispanic communities, there is a mistrust of physicians. There is a mistrust of the medical profession. So there are probably many people who go undiagnosed in those communities simply because of a history of mistrusting those organizations as a result of abuse that they've occurred throughout the course of our history. Other interesting notes here, 5.8 million Americans who identify as LGBTQIA, which I do, also struggle with mental health illness, mental health disability. Interestingly enough, those individuals, in particular the transgender community, struggle more than probably other people who identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual, simply because there is oftentimes a loss of identity and connection with family members. There's a loss in connection with friends, things along those lines. Their foundation and what they've known is often pulled out from under them. And then lastly, 19% of Native Americans also struggle with mental health issues. But when you look at the number, 827,000 people, that's extraordinary because the Native American community is typically situated in remote areas and often not counted in terms of struggling with mental health. Oftentimes, what you hear about Native Americans is the struggle with alcohol abuse or things along those lines. You rarely hear about the fact that the alcohol abuse is a symptom of a bigger issue, which is often a mental health crisis. So some additional information, 11.1% of adults who are diagnosed with a mental health or mental well-being issue, 5.5 million Americans don't get help because they're uninsured. Insurance plays, as we all know, a very large factor in getting help. If you don't have the option or you don't have availability to seek out resources because you can't pay for them, that's significant. That contributes to the mental health crisis that we see within our country. Barriers to help, it can be an absence or a misdiagnosis. There was an interesting thing that I ran into recently where a friend of mine who just had a baby and came back to work and was in the conference room or in a break room speaking with someone, and she started crying, and someone walked in and said, "Oh, you have a baby blues. Oh, it'll pass." Baby blues or saying something like that really diminishes the impact that many women feel with postpartum illness, postpartum depression, and coming back to work. So when you say things, however well-meaning they may be, however well-intentioned they may be, even if it's a joke, the comments can have a real impact on someone feeling as though they can be their authentic selves within the workplace. Other issues that can impact someone from receiving help with mental well-being, incarceration versus diagnosis. So often you hear of people on the news being, incarcerated for an event or for a situation. Oftentimes those people are put in jail cells instead of receiving diagnosis or support for mental health. I won't go through all of these, but language barriers, lack of cultural curiosity. I know that the term within our DEI framework is to be culturally competent. I've thrown out the word competent because I don't think anyone is ever competent in an area in this fast changing world that we are currently living in. So I say cultural curiosity. Ask the questions, understand what brought them to you, rather than trying to give them a quick fix or a quick answer and moving on. Whoops. So again, we all know that a healthy work environment is good for mental health. I don't know about you, but there have been jobs that I've absolutely hated, and going into a workspace that you absolutely feel as though is toxic and detrimental to your mental and physical well-being is something that I would not wish on anyone. Poor working environments, including things like discrimination, inequality, excessive workloads, low job control, and job insecurity pose a risk to mental health. And you can see it anytime you look at an organization that's recently gone through a layoff. The individuals who remain often go through survivor's guilt and are on heightened sense of alert and awareness, thinking, when's the next shoe going to drop? Am I next? To have that kind of feeling hanging over your head day after day is its own kind of trauma. 18.5% of working age adults were estimated to have a mental health disorder or a mental well-being disorder in 2019. And this is interesting for anyone who works in the business world or anyone really who is operating an entity where people are critical. An estimated 12 billion working days are lost each year due to depression and anxiety, which translates to $1 million per year in lost productivity. So we know that creating a healthy space and a healthy work environment is not only the right thing to do for individuals, but it is beneficial to ensuring that any organization is able to achieve the mission and vision for which they're in business to accomplish. So the facts. As an HR professional, and I meant to qualify earlier before I began speaking, I am not a behavioral health expert. I am not someone who's licensed in behavioral health. What I am speaking from is my lived experience, and I'm speaking from someone who works in the field of human resources. So these are all instances and things that have driven my passion regarding mental health and mental well-being, because you see someone at work every day, and when you are someone who struggles with it, seeing someone who also struggles with some of the same things heightens your awareness and makes you want to do something, makes you want to contribute to help the situation. So one thing I do want to be clear on, it's your choice as a worker, as an employee, to disclose if you are struggling with a mental health issue. In the same way that you would potentially disclose a physical disability to an employer if you needed a reasonable accommodation, it applies to a mental health issue as well. If you don't disclose to your employer, they can't provide an accommodation to you. You can absolutely choose to keep it confidential. You do not need to disclose it when you apply for a job. But if you ever find yourself in a situation where you do need an accommodation, whether it's a change to work schedule, whether it's working maybe from home for a period of time, you need to enter into that collaborative conversation with the employer to find a reasonable accommodation for whatever it is that you're looking for. But if you don't disclose, it's not the employer's responsibility to guess or to assume that you're struggling with a mental health issue. So as we think about the concept of mental health, especially in the workplace, it's really critical to talk about what it means to belong in the workplace and to create a safe work environment. Disclosing that you have a mental health issue, whether you are a new employee or whether you're a tenured employee or whether you're someone like me who leads the people division of a large organization, if you don't feel safe in your environment, the likelihood that you're going to disclose something to make yourself even more vulnerable is very, very slim. So when we talk about belonging, it goes to not only the mission of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it also goes to the feeling of being safe. I'm in a safe environment where I can share something that's very intimate and personal to me. So when you talk about belonging, it means to feel safe and secure. You feel supported. You feel as though you can say what you need to say to your boss, to your coworker, to your CEO, and there won't be backlash or recriminations taken towards you because you've disclosed something. Things that go along with this are creating an inclusive workforce and psychological safety. So psychological safety, as you look at the term, I know it's bantied around quite a bit these days, but what it means is I have the opportunity to say what I need to say in an environment where others may not agree with me, but that's okay. I can say what I need to say in an authentic, respectful way, and I will be treated authentically and respectfully because it's my opinion. It's who I am. It's how I feel. when you talk about psychological safety, it also means that you're free to make a mistake. You're free to try things that may not be successful. You are also given opportunities, what I like to call, you're given opportunities to fail, and know that failing is not necessarily a negative thing if you've learned something and you've grown from it. Psychological safety really sets the foundation and the framework for creating inclusion in the workplace and for being vulnerable. Again, if you don't feel as though you are in a safe space, the likelihood that you're going to disclose anything that would make you feel as though you're in line to be a target for a hostile workplace or being bullied within the workplace is going to be slim to none. So I want to share a little bit about my mental health story. So I always knew as a kid that there was something wrong with me. I didn't know how to articulate it at a young age, and it grew with me through junior high into high school. I always was a worrier. I always was an anxious little kid. And if there was a worst case scenario to come up with at any possible time, Martians invading, the world running out of Snickers bars, whatever the case was, I was that kid that would panic about it. And so, where this really came to be an issue for me, when I was about 35 years old, I worked for a financial institution here in Omaha that's no longer in business. And one day, my manager at that time called me into her office, and we had a conversation that we weren't able to complete. And she called me later that night at home. That was back in the days, I'm going to date myself, when everyone had a landline. And so at that time, my husband answered the phone. And I think she must have put two and two together that I lived with a man and assumed that this person was my partner. The next day, she called me back into her office, and I believed it was to finish up the conversation from the day before. And actually, what it turned out to be was her forcing me to out myself to her, basically saying things like, "You don't need to be ashamed. This isn't something you should worry about. People will accept you. You're safe with me." And I remember sitting in the chair across from her, perspiring profusely because I was having an anxiety moment, a panic attack. And I finally just said, "Yes, you're right. I am, absolutely." And she said, "Thank you for sharing that with me." And I got up and I bolted out of there as quickly as I could. Shortly thereafter, I was an assistant vice president with this financial institution. I'd had a good track record up to that point, and I felt that I was going to make my career there. And I didn't get fired for being outed, but projects got taken away from me. Advancement opportunities got taken away from me. The opportunity to work on major initiatives with high-ranking officials within the organization were taken away. And little by little, my world got smaller within the organization. We were shortly acquired after that by another financial institution that's no longer in business here in Omaha. And she came to me, my manager came to me and said, "Listen, I think it would be best if you found something else because there's just nothing here for you." I had been there 9 years. I had had wonderful track record up to that point, and my world, because it became so small over the course of time from this disclosure, led to me being without a job. I share this all with you to say, if I hadn't provided information about being gay, if I hadn't provided information about having anxiety or having a panic disorder, by all appearances, I'm privileged in our society. I'm a white man. That carries with it a lot of privilege and a lot of cachet in most areas, especially in conservative areas or especially in areas that are dominated by people that look like me. However, once you disclose, once you share, once you bring a level of vulnerability into a situation, it's easy to become marginalized, and in some cases, you fear tokenism. You don't want to be that person that's Oh, that's you can't do that with Ralph because if you give him too much, he might have an anxiety attack. You can't give that to Ralph because if you do that, he might have a panic attack. So that sort of kit glove approach. So I share all that with you to say, imagine if you were a woman. Imagine if you were a person of color. Imagine if you were someone who didn't have privilege just because of color of their skin. How difficult that would be to disclose and share this kind of information. So let's speed up now. Let's talk about the pandemic. So in 2020, I thought it would be brilliant, just a brilliant idea to change jobs because everyone was in lockdown. So that's the perfect time to look for a new job. I will say that that was never in any HR course that I've ever taught or studied or in any book. That was just pure intuition that I thought it would be a great idea. And so before I knew it, I was interviewing with my now manager on Zoom, meeting my coworkers on Zoom. In July of 2020, I became the vice president of HR for Lutheran Family Services. And shortly after I started work, I started getting calls, not only internally, but from people that I knew in the community saying, what do we do about this COVID thing? What are you doing for people? How are you helping people? All of these questions that you would ask someone who works in HR who's supposed to be a people expert. And I said, no idea what you do for this. I don't have any ideas. I really thought people were getting through COVID the same way that I was. Shopping on Amazon, binge eating like I was in my own after school special and watching Tiger King. I didn't have any kind of solution or any kind of answer for people going through this. I thought, everyone's getting through this the best way that they can. But as the pandemic wore on, and I do connect best when I can do face to face with people, when I have a relationship with people, and as the pandemic wore on and lockdown continued, my depression kicked in, my anxiety kicked in, and I began to feel incredibly disconnected. And it was then that I realized I had to do something to help myself. And if I could also help myself, I wanted to try to also help other people. And that is where the ACT model came in. ACT stands for Acknowledge, Compassionate Accountability, and Transparency. So when you talk about acknowledge, when you think of the model in and of itself, everyone in your organization is struggling with mental health. Everyone, whether it's being stressed, whether they say they're burnt out, whether they say they suffer from exhaustion, because we know that not getting enough sleep can also lead to feelings of inadequate emotional and mental well-being. We also know that outside influences have inside impact. The whole notion of keep your life outside of work at the door, don't bring it in, is not something that I've ever seen anyone do successfully. So if you're struggling with something outside, it's going to come into the workplace in some way, shape, or form. You may see it as increased absenteeism. You may see it as isolation. You may see someone who was once gregarious and, holding court at a table in the break room off by themselves. But you will notice the signs. And if you think about maybe people that you've worked with in the past, when there's a sudden change in behavior, it's easy to pick up. It's easy to recognize if you're looking for it. Leaders must understand that mental health impacts performance because how could it not? How could mental health and well-being, when you are struggling with it, not impact your performance? So as leaders, whether you're working in a nonprofit, whether you're working in a government agency, whether you're working in a for-profit business, it is critical to ensure that policies, procedures, and handbooks acknowledge mental health. One thing that we did at Lutheran Family Services is we acknowledged mental health was an issue. And instead of just saying, take a sick day, we actually put in mental health days for people and we call them that. We don't shy away from people saying, I need a mental health day. Great, we've got the time, take it. It's 4 days a year. You get one mental health day a quarter. If you don't use the 4 during that time frame, you lose the mental health days for that month, but you get 4 back beginning January 1. So every year your bucket gets full with 4 days. Remove coded language from the workplace. Stop telling people that, oh, you just got baby blues, or you're just feeling a little down in the dumps. If people have shared that they suffer with depression, that they suffer with anxiety, allow them to say that. Allow them to say, my anxiety is really bad today, because I'd rather know that about you so that I can collaborate with you and work with you than just thinking you're a little down in the dumps, because there's generally a little bit more to it. Language used in the environment cannot stigmatize mental health and well-being, and here's what I mean by that. I've worked in environments, or I've been in environments where I've been asked to come in and consult on diversity specifically to this topic, where people will say things like, oh, my OCD is really bad today. Oh, I'm feeling really bipolar today. If you're working with someone who struggles with OCD and they happen to be standing next to you, that's going to marginalize them and make them fearful for ever sharing anything with coworkers or to in any way disclose that they're struggling with that. Bipolar disorder is an issue that people struggle with, on a daily basis. There are millions of people who struggle with bipolar disorder. So taking someone's true illness and using it to describe a day where you're feeling a little frazzled does a true disservice to that person who has a true issue with their mental health and mental well-being. Compassion and accountability. This is critical if you're working with someone, or if someone has told you that they have something going on in their lives that's impacting their mental well-being. Oftentimes as leaders, and I used to do this, when someone would come to me and say, I'm struggling because I've got issues with my son or daughter. I'm struggling because I'm separating from my spouse. I'm struggling because of the death of a parent. Things along those lines. My first response would be to take things away from them. Take things away from the person so that they can deal with whatever they've got going on. What I learned from my own experience is that when you take things away, you immediately stigmatize and you shame the person. They're coming to you out of a sense of needing help, and your way of helping is to take things away from them. My approach is a little bit different. Prioritize tasks and assignments with the individual. What can we do? What needs to be done now? What can we do later? Is there a way that we can delegate out some of the things that you have? Remove the obstacles. What's in the way of you working on this project or this assignment that we really need you to do, and we really need your expertise on? Provide micro check-ins for the person. One thing that you can do for someone who is an anxious person is check in with them on a regular basis. Doesn't mean every hour on the hour, but if you're setting up regular times to check in on their progress and check in on their work, for someone like me, that allows me to know that I'm on the right track. That allows me to know that I'm meeting expectations, or that allows me to pivot if I need to. Waiting to the very end to determine if I've done something correctly, if I'm going through something in my life, only heightens the anxiety. The key with this process is to ensure that the leader doesn't shame and blame the employee. You don't hear things like, oh my gosh, you picked the worst time in the world to separate from your spouse, or oh my gosh, you picked the worst time in the world for your parent to pass away. You want to ensure that you're looking at that individual as a human being and figuring out where can I collaborate and where can I help, instead of judging what you're going through. The last step in this process is transparency. Don't stop the conversation around mental health with the employee, and that's what I was alluding to earlier. If they have felt comfortable enough to come to you and say, I suffer with anxiety, I suffer with OCD, I suffer with panic disorder, don't let it be the last time that they have that conversation with you. An easy thing to do if you are a leader and someone shares that they're struggling with their mental health, have that initial conversation, and in a week or two, when the opportunity presents itself, say something as simple as, you shared with me you were struggling with anxiety. How are you doing? It's okay if you don't want to talk right now, but know that my door is always open. What a great thing to say. You're acknowledging, you're not judging, and you're leaving the door open for future conversations. For someone like me, that's enough to know that I'm safe here. I'm safe here. I'm not going to be penalized or suffer recriminations because I have shared something that's deeply personal to me. So, unconscious messages impacting mental well-being. Messages that diminish our mental health and overall well-being includes things like not prioritizing mental health in your equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives. When you exclude mental health, when you exclude mental well-being, it suddenly becomes unimportant. When you don't hold events like this, where someone who has a personal story can share, it excludes people from wanting to talk about the events in their lives. And it also gives the indication that what they're going through is not important. It's also important that companies that promote family-friendly environments really stand behind what they say. One thing that we did, again, at LFS is we incorporated bereavement time for miscarriages because we realized that that is a significant event for people in their lives. You just don't come back to work the next day and suddenly you're better. So we acknowledge that as part of our overall bereavement process. The other thing that we have put in is pet bereavement. I have 2 dogs. I love them. You saw them earlier. They mean the world to me, and they're family. And so when you lose a pet, that's often, in some cases, as traumatic as losing a person. So let's acknowledge that. Let's recognize that not everyone has the same life experiences, not everyone has the same lived experiences, and let's honor what that means. So supporting mental well-being. Make sure that people within your organization are encouraged to speak up. Make sure that people within your organization have the opportunity to provide ideas for change. The pet bereavement and the bereavement for miscarriages were ideas that were brought forward by employees. When you show employees that you take their suggestions and their ideas seriously and that they have merit, it does so much to help engage that individual with the larger organization, and it lets them feel heard. Are leaders culturally curious? If you bring something to a leader to say, I think we should do this, do leaders say, well, why? Tell me more about that. Or do they just simply look at you and say, no, we're not going to do that? When you have a leader that shuts down an idea before they even know about what it is or how it could impact the employment population, that might be a red flag that change within the organization needs to occur. And create an environment that allows for the organization to challenge the status quo. Has the organization become so rigid that it's not open to new ideas? Has the organization become so rigid that it stops conversation? If you are in an organization where every time you bring an idea forward or every time you bring a suggestion forward, nothing is done, that in of itself is an answer. That in and of itself lets you know that you need to work to change the organization, or maybe you need to find an organization that's more open and accepting. Okay, lastly, supporting mental well-being, some key things. Review policies and procedures. Watch language within the organization. Don't be afraid to call people out when they say things like OCD or bipolar. Obviously, you'd want to do that in a private coaching session, but let them know, hey, we want to be mindful of what we say. Rethink sick days. What can you do more, better, different for sick days? Can you create mental health days within your organization? As someone who works in the field of HR, I can tell you that mental health and the nurturing and caretaking of mental health has become such a hot topic in the field of HR because it's impacting so many people. I don't know about any of you in the room or any of you that are watching this, but there have been times when I just said, I have to play hooky today. I don't want to go in. I just don't feel like it. I can't muster the energy to go in. Sometimes you would think that that would be burnout or I'm tired. Sometimes it can be indicative of a bigger issue. Remove the term cultural competency. Replace competency with curiosity. I'm going to remain curious about what I don't know. Competency implies mastery. I don't think that any of us will ever be masters in anything. So I like to use the term curiosity. Invest in education that supports mental health and mental well-being. Bring people in to talk about it. Bring people in to share lived experiences. Make sure that people are connected with mental health resources in the community, with whatever that may be, and create an environment where people feel safe to talk about those things. And then last but not least, if all else fails, feel free to use the ACT model. It will at least give you a roadmap to start and give you a place that you can begin figuring out how to have the conversation. And then I've got two quick little handouts for you that I want to show. Again, this last slide just goes through some final thoughts regarding mental well-being. Remember, what you want to do is focus on supporting, not fixing. The person that you're working with isn't broken. The person that you're working with is going through something significant in their lives. So you want to support that, not fix it. And then, should I just escape out of here? Yeah, if I could. And then I have two quick handouts, and then I will be finished.
I just sent them through here, so they should be, you should be able to just pull up. There you go.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. So the first handout that I want to provide is something that you can use within workspaces and conversations. It is the ACT model. It's broken out and it walks you through each of the stages of the ACT model, from acknowledgement through transparency. I've put in here language that you can use that is legal, that would be supported by any HR person that I know within the framework of having conversations. And the important thing is with the language, with the conversations, remember, we're going under the assumption that the person is disclosed to you. You're not assuming that they're struggling with a mental health issue. What my model supports is that they've had the conversation with you, and that once they've had the conversation with you, as the leader, as the person working with them, you keep the door open for future conversations. And then the second piece that I want to show to you, again, suitable for work or framing. I'm kidding, you don't need to frame it. Let's see here, let me make the screen a little bit bigger. Is mental health and well-being tips. So ideas for inclusive language. Say, instead of the person is suffering with mental health, say the person has a mental health condition. Say the person who has been diagnosed with, not they have. Other things in here are items that you might want to consider. Things like X lives with a mental health condition. Just being a little bit more inclusive with terminology. Non-inclusive terms, things like they are mentally ill or they're not normal. They're bipolar. She has baby blues. All of these things that we sometimes hear within our everyday language or just in everyday conversation, again, there may not be any ill intent said with the words, but we know that words have impact. We know that impact is, what matters with impact is how it is taken by the receiver, not by the sender. And then again, avoid words like bonkers, crazy, loopy, loony bin, psycho, deranged, or saying things like, oh my gosh, they're so mental. When you start labeling people with these terms, again, you move into a stage of judging and not helping. So I want to thank all of you today for allowing me to share my story and to talk about mental health and the impact that it has. And if you have any questions, I'm glad to answer them.
Thank you so much, Ralph.
Sure.
There was so much great information in there. I love the stories. I love hearing what you're doing at Lutheran Family Services. Though the mental health days, I think, like I'm rarely sick, so I would much rather have someone tell me to go take a day for myself than here's some time when you feel like crap and can't come in. Couple of questions. With all the numbers are always changing. So what would you suggest as the best resource to stay current on kind of the statistics, like the numbers that that what's happening out there?
Yeah, that is in the back of the packet of your presentation. I put all of my sources there. It's the American and Mental Health Institute, and that's where I pull my information from.
Okay.
I just saw yesterday it was just updated, and so that 51 million figure that I showed you at the beginning is now up to 59 million. So they are very current with their information. What I also love about the information is they break it out by demographics. They show you how each demographic group is impacted, and they also give you insight into why the stats may be so high or what's going on, economically or politically that might drive those numbers.
All right, thank you. And then, do you have a favorite book on this thread or this topic, whether it be more story based or more workplace based? Like, do you have kind of your go-to?
One book that I leaned on because I was going through some personal struggles was Walking on Eggshells. It was a story about dealing with someone who. Uh, it was a very interesting piece because it dealt with how individuals interact with people who might have narcissistic tendencies, or how people might feel unsafe to disclose information in front of a narcissist. And it got me thinking a little bit about the situation that I had when I was um, essentially forced out of my job when I was early, and the behaviors that I noticed and things along those lines. In terms of that, no, I don't. I listen to a lot of Brene Brown. I listen to a lot of what it means to be vulnerable. She was actually my inspiration for beginning to talk about this. When I do suicide awareness training, I do share the story of my attempt at suicide and what that meant. And I have found that when you're authentic and when you're vulnerable, it empowers you because you're no longer kept hostage by the stories.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to build my personal library. Nina, you had a question?
I did. Well, thank you so much for sharing. That was really informative. I did have a question, especially when it comes to workplace. So, what is your recommendation? Because sometimes, how important or how difficult is it to actually get a mental health diagnosis? And is a diagnosis important for HR as well as the workplace to be able to get accommodations at the workplace and all of the things you spoke about in your own story? I do feel that sometimes it's not always easy to get a diagnosis of a mental health issue. And so, can you give some guidance around how can how difficult is it? How can you get a diagnosis? Are there centers here in Nebraska that can help with that? And then, because if there isn't a formal diagnosis, then it becomes really left to the organizations to implement accommodations or not.
Mhm. That's a great question. One thing that I would say is if you are engaged with a physician and you do have a formal diagnosis and you need an accommodation at your workplace, go talk to your human resources person and let them know what you've been diagnosed with and that you may need an accommodation. Familiarize yourself with ADAA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and its subsequent amendments. Panic disorder, anxiety, all of those things are listed as items for accommodation. So they're not as restrictive as they used to be, several years ago. The other thing that I would say too is once you go into the Human Resources Office and you say, I have a diagnosed, or I think, or I'm struggling with this, or things along those lines, that immediately should open the door to a collaborative conversation between you and the HR person to say, let's talk a little bit about this. As an HR person, what I would say if you came into me and said, I'm suffering from depression, I would say, okay, well, let's talk about, a little bit about this. Have you been officially diagnosed with depression? Are you seeing a doctor? No, I'm not seeing a doctor right now. The conversation might go along the lines of, well, in order to formally give you an accommodation, I would need certification from a doctor, but let's talk about what we can do for you right now. Let's talk about what might be going on right now that might provide you some relief. Maybe you can provide them a couple of days off so that they can get into their doctor. Maybe you can provide them with a short-term leave of absence. Maybe there's other things that you can do that are within the confines of the organization that are not restrictive, in the sense of saying, well, I don't have a piece of paper in my hand, I can't help you. But the best thing that you can do is find a doctor, get a diagnosis, and then enter into that collaborative conversation with the HR department. Once you begin entering into that collaborative conversation, they're required to work with you on a solution. Now, the solution they may come up with may not be the solution that you want, so that's why it's called collaborative. There may be some give and take that you need to do. So if the solution they come up with is not, to your liking or not to what you want, you need to be mindful of the fact that the organization is responsible for providing an accommodation, providing it doesn't cause an undue hardship to the organization. That is something that you'll need to walk through with the company or with the person that you're working with. But until you enter into that conversation, they're not obligated to do anything for you outside of the normal employer-employee relationship. Did that answer your question?
I had a
Yes,
question.
yes, it did. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
sure.
I had a question more about your personal story, Ralph.
Mhm.
When when you felt forced to out yourself,
Mhm.
were you also outing yourself about your disability, in addition to your sexuality?
So when I when that happened, I didn't know what was wrong with me. Again, I had not been diagnosed. I just thought you're just weird, and this is just what happens to you. And it wasn't until I was in 2019, or excuse me, in 2013, that I formally received a diagnosis, and I was
Okay.
43 years old at that time. Another traumatic event happened. I had to go down to Texas to be with my mom because she had suffered a stroke. And through the stroke, she was driving while she had the stroke. And with the stroke, they diagnosed her with early onset Alzheimer's
Oh no.
disease. And so that again was a trigger, and it was terrible. I came back, and what forced me to seek help is at that time, my boss came into me one day. I was Monday or Tuesday after I got back, and she just asked me for a report, and it wasn't anything ridiculous. It was something I'd done, millions of times, and I just started perspiring, and it was awful, to the point where she shut the door and said, what's wrong? Because I couldn't get the Kleenex fast enough to dab my face. And I told her, I said, I don't know what's wrong with me. I have no idea what's wrong with me. And that's when she stepped in as a compassionate leader and said, I want you to take a couple of days, go see your doctor, go find out what's wrong, because you've been through a lot. Maybe this is a holdover, maybe it's not, but go see your doctor. And I was 43, and until that time, I just thought it was how I was wired.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Better late than never.
absolutely, yes, yes.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Nina hit on, that I'm sure is a situation that comes up more often than we would realize is, the ADA kind of dictates like what has to be done, right? It's this box of like, here's the process, you bring me this or you tell me this, and then we have to do these things. But I think it's important, for anyone who's listening to this later, that's involved in an organization, to know like you're not that you don't have to stop there.
Right.
Like if there's something that just makes sense that you can do that doesn't have a whole lot of process behind it that can make an impact, then like you can do that without all the paperwork. Like
Exactly.
if it works and if it just makes sense and it's not overly disruptive, right? I'm sure you have examples. And I think that sometimes people get so confined by like meeting, like just following what's in the box, and not thinking that you can do more or do different,
Mm-hmm.
kind of holds back some of those situations
Mhm.
that could turn into.
I think Megan, you're absolutely right, and I just want to add some more points here. I think that training of HR staff about what are the alternatives and about the language that can be used is really important. I do think that it's a slippery slope because staff are always cognizant of laws and ethics and regulations around, what you can say to a member who comes in and shares with you, and what you can't say. I remember, just being in the positions I've been in, that it's very slippery slope. I mean, once you have a piece of paper that actually gives you a diagnosis, it's a lot easier to work with. And while we love to think like, we can go outside the box and try to be kind, sometimes it's not always ethically or within the confines of the organization's rules and regulations. So I think that what you're saying is important, and the presentation is so powerful. I'm just wondering, is there a move in Omaha to look at training opportunities for HR staff, right? I mean, because that's where the buck stops there. Like, you are going into your HR and saying that. And oftentimes I've had these conversations where the HR person will say, I want to do this, but I don't know whether that's right to say or do. And, I just don't know. And so it's not that they're being willful. It's just mental health is like you mentioned, it can be really sensitive topic. It's very nuanced.
Mhm.
It's not like other disabilities because it's invisible.
Mhm.
And when you have those kind of nuanced conversations, not all staff are equipped to have those, and not all are going to be trailblazers. So I think it's important to recognize that training is key here.
Agree. Agree.
We are down to kind of our last few minutes. Any final questions? Awesome. Thank you for
Thank you.
your stories and for
Thank you.
your insights. Really appreciate you
You're
coming
welcome.
today.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
So again, that was
Thank you.
Ralph Kellogg with Lutheran Family Services. As we wrap up our last few minutes, we'll take some time to give some announcements for upcoming things. And on June, this is not in Omaha, but on June 7th and 8th is the Lincoln Disability Pride celebration. I don't have the full schedule, but those are the dates. And then June 25th, the Women in Engineering event will be held at Heartland of America Park, and this is focusing on youth and engineering, and that will go from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Ashley, do you have any upcoming events or announcements?
Oh, I do know that the Nebraska Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing is hosting a Deaf Awareness Day at the Omaha Zoo, and that is on June 23rd, if my date is correct. I believe it's a Sunday. If I'm correct, it's the June 23rd
Awesome.
Where is it at?
At the zoo.
at the Omaha Zoo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Natalie, do you have any?
No, I do not.
Nina, any events?
Yeah, yeah, I do want to share a very historic, sort of breaking news, and I know it's probably not at the Omaha or Nebraska level, but the federal aviation bill has just come out yesterday. It got passed through, and this is extremely historic because a lot of us in the disability community have been working for it, and it's the airline bill that actually got passed and approved for more inclusive support for people with disability who travel. And it also has provisions for looking at having wheelchair users take their wheelchair into the airplane, which I think is incredible. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. If you haven't seen the bill, you can look it up. It's the federal aviation bill that just got passed.
Thanks for sharing that. It was really exciting. Hopefully things actually get implemented. The last thing that I just remembered, on May 31st at 10 a.m., the city will be doing a groundbreaking ceremony in conjunction with Imagine Inclusion for the Zorinsky Inclusive Playground. It'll be out at the main shelter area off 156th by the water park entrance. So community is invited. We're just gonna officially break ground, so construction will get underway, and then there'll be a ribbon cutting this summer, late this summer. Okay, if that is everything, then thank you to Pam, our sign language interpreter, and Cox Communication, Channel 22, where this will air every Monday evenings at 5. And our next meeting will be July 18th at 10:30. Thanks, Nina.
Thanks.